disappoint the avoidance and not for everyone to stop chasing. Start standing in your power. Would you like me to also script a 20-second Mel Robbins style opening hook for the speech itself, so it grabs the audience right away? When you stop overgiving, you shift the entire dynamic between you and the avoidant. Overgiving is a cycle that so many people fall into without realizing it, because it feels natural to show love, support, and understanding. But when that care turns into chasing, fixing, or constantly proving your worth, you're not giving from a place of power. You're giving from fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being abandoned, fear that if you don't show up twice as much, you'll never be enough. This is the exact dynamic that allows the avoidant to stay comfortable in their distance. They don't have to face their emotional walls because you're doing the work for both of you. You're carrying the weight of two people, hoping your love will be enough to break through their silence. The moment you stop giving, something powerful happens. You stop rescuing them from their own patterns, and you stop sending the message that your value comes from how much you can pour into them. It's not rejection. It's redirection. You're taking that energy and pouring it back into yourself where it belongs. The avoidant may interpret it as disappointment, but that disappointment is the very thing that wakes them up. Suddenly the balance shifts. They notice your absence. They feel the loss of your constant reassurance. They begin to wonder why you're not running to fill the silence anymore. It's uncomfortable at first, because if you've been the giver, stepping back feels unnatural. You'll feel the urge to explain yourself, to justify why you're not answering every text instantly, why you're not planning every date, why you're not bending over backwards to keep the connection alive. But true strength is in holding steady. You don't have to be cold or cruel. You just stop doing the emotional labor that keeps the avoidant from facing themselves. It's not about punishing them, it's about respecting you. What you'll notice is that your worth doesn't decrease when you stop overgiving. In fact, it rises. Because the truth is, overgiving was never love. It was fear disguised as love. Real love flows both ways. Real love respects balance. By stepping back, you create space for the avoidant to step forward, if they choose. If they don't, that's clarity, not loss. You'll finally see whether they were invested in you or simply comfortable with the benefits of your effort. And here's the hardest truth: overgiving never guarantees connection. No matter how much you pour in, if the other person isn't willing to meet you, the bucket will always feel empty. That's why disappointing the avoidant by no longer carrying both sides is an act of courage. You're no longer bribing them with love to stay. You're saying, I know my value, and I don't need to perform for your approval. That shift changes everything. The avoidant may resist, they may withdraw, they may even test to see if you'll fall back into old habits. But if you stay steady, you prove to yourself that your worth was never tied to how much you gave away. It was always in how much you were willing to hold for yourself. Do you want me to write the other 5 keynotes in the same 500-word motivational style so you'll have the complete speech ready? Silence is one of the most powerful tools you can use when dealing with an avoidant because it breaks the cycle of over-explaining and over-pursuing. For people who are deeply empathetic or anxious in relationships, silence feels terrifying. It feels like punishment, like distance, like rejection. That's why the avoidant thrives when you keep filling the gaps with words, reassurances, and explanations. You unknowingly protect them from feeling the weight of their own emotional withdrawal. Every time you chase with words, you're soothing their discomfort, but you're also keeping yourself stuck in a one-sided exchange. Silence flips that script. Instead of being the one who fills the void, you allow the avoidant to sit with it. When you stop explaining yourself, something interesting happens. You reclaim your dignity. You're no longer defending your worth or convincing someone of your value. You're no longer begging for closeness, hoping your words will break through the walls. Instead, your silence communicates what your explanations never could, that you are secure enough in yourself to step back. It's not about ignoring or playing games. It's about sending the message that you don't need to beg for space in someone else's life. Your calm pause speaks volumes, and it often says more than 100 messages ever could. The avoidant may at first feel relief when you go silent, because distance is their comfort zone. But over time, the silence becomes louder. They start to notice the absence of your constant reassurance. They feel the gap where your attention used to be. And here's the shift: avoidants are comfortable when they're in control of the distance. But when you choose silence intentionally, you take that control back. Suddenly, they don't get to decide all the terms of closeness and withdrawal. You're no longer participating in the chase, and that unsettles the very dynamic they rely on. This doesn't mean silence is about manipulation. It's about strength. Silence is a choice, not a tactic. It's the choice to no longer engage in conversations that go in circles, to no longer plead with someone who resists listening, to no longer spill your heart just to meet a blank wall. Instead, silence becomes your boundary. It becomes the line that says, I will not waste my energy where it isn't valued. At first, sitting in silence will feel heavy. You'll fight the urge to reach out, to clarify, to fill the uncomfortable space. But the more you practice it, the more you'll see how freeing it is. You'll notice that silence protects your energy in ways words never could. It allows you to watch, observe, and see whether the avoidant steps toward you on their own. That's the key. Silence doesn't force anyone. It simply reveals. If the avoidant values you, your pause will create room for them to act differently. If they don't, then their inaction gives you the clarity you've been searching for all along. Ultimately, silence is not about shutting down communication. It's about elevating it. It's choosing to stop talking to someone who isn't listening and instead redirecting that voice back to yourself. It's realizing that the most powerful statement you can make sometimes is no statement at all. And that is how silence becomes louder than words. Do you want me to continue with keynote 3? Choose boundaries, not battles, in the same 500-word motivational style. Boundaries are not about shutting people out. They're about protecting your peace and making sure your energy goes where it's respected. When you're connected to an avoidant, the temptation is always to fight for closeness, to argue your way into connection, to explain why you deserve more. But arguments rarely change an avoidant's behavior. In fact, battles usually push them further away because conflict triggers their instinct to retreat. That's why choosing boundaries instead of battles is the key to breaking the cycle. A boundary isn't about controlling them. It's about guiding yourself. It's not about making demands. It's about defining what you will and will not allow in your life. When you set a boundary, you're essentially saying, I matter too. You're choosing not to exhaust yourself in endless fights over attention, affection, or commitment. Instead, you're calmly stating your limits, what behaviors you will accept and what you won't. For example, instead of begging for consistent communication, you create a standard that says if someone goes silent for days without explanation, you won't chase them or put your life on hold. That's not a battle. It's a boundary, and it's far more powerful because it removes the avoidant's ability to control your emotions. The beauty of boundaries is that they don't require shouting ultimatums or dramatic exits. They require clarity. Boundaries are about teaching people how to treat you, and more importantly, teaching yourself that your worth is not negotiable. When you battle, you fight to change them. When you set boundaries, you focus on protecting you. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, you're no longer the one begging for love. You're the one deciding what kind of love you'll accept. Avoidance may test your boundaries at first. They may withdraw, resist, or try to guilt you back into old patterns. But consistency is where your strength lies. A battle invites drama. A boundary invites respect. Even if the avoidant doesn't say it out loud, your boundaries force them to recognize that the dynamics have changed. You're no longer willing to play the game of push and pull. You've stepped off the battlefield and into your own power. And here's what many people miss. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They don't block connection. They create healthier conditions for it. If an avoidant wants to be in your life, your boundaries give them a clear path to do so respectfully. If they can't, then the boundary gives you clarity to walk away without resentment. Either way, you win because you've stopped wasting energy on proving yourself and started investing energy into protecting yourself. Choosing boundaries over battles isn't easy, especially if you've spent years fighting scraps of affection. It requires courage to stop arguing and start standing firm. But the moment you do, everything shifts. You feel calmer, stronger, and clearer. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. And in that space, you discover the truth. The right person won't see your boundaries as a disappointment. They'll see them as proof of your self-respect. And anyone who can't honor that simply isn't worthy of the access you once gave so freely. Do you want me to move on and expand keynote 4? Withhold the instant yes in the same deep, motivational 500-word style. Avoidants often grow used to the idea that you will always be available, always say yes, and always bend your life around their comfort. This expectation is created over time, especially if you've been the one constantly adjusting, accommodating, and stepping in to make things easier for them. When every request is met with an immediate yes, when every plan is rearranged to fit theirs, you unintentionally send the message that your needs come second. That dynamic not only drains you, but it also reinforces the avoidant's belief that they don't need to step up. This is where the power of withholding the instant yes comes in. It's not about punishment. It's about teaching yourself and them that your time, energy, and love have value. The quinstant yes is usually driven by fear. Fear that if you say no, you'll lose them or they'll pull away. But the truth is, constantly saying yes doesn't secure closeness. It only breeds imbalance. You end up carrying the weight of the relationship while they get comfortable taking. By pausing, by considering whether a request actually works for you, you send a very different signal. You show that your life doesn't revolve around pleasing them, and that you respect yourself enough to weigh your own needs before committing. That pause is powerful. It creates space for them to recognize that access to you is not automatic. When you begin to withhold the instant yes, you may feel guilt. You may worry that you're disappointing them, and you probably are, but that disappointment is healthy. It disrupts the pattern where they always come first and you always compromise. Disappointment forces them to confront the reality that you are a whole person with your own priorities, not just a safety net waiting to catch their inconsistency. And in the long run, this disappointment is the very thing that can inspire growth. If they truly care, they'll begin to adjust, because your new behavior shows them what balanced love looks like. Withholding the instant yes doesn't mean you become unkind or uncooperative. It simply means you stop responding automatically. Instead of dropping everything to meet them, you start saying, "Let me check my schedule," or "That doesn't work for me, but here's what does." These small shifts communicate respect for yourself, and they begin to set a new standard for how the relationship operates. Suddenly, the avoidant doesn't get to dictate all the terms. You're no longer just reacting. You're actively choosing. The more you practice this, the stronger your sense of self becomes. You realize that saying no doesn't mean rejection. It means balance. You learn that disappointing someone who expects endless yeses is not betrayal. It's self-respect. And here's the unexpected outcome. When you stop being instantly available, you often become more valued. People tend to appreciate what isn't guaranteed, and the avoidant who once took your constant yes for granted starts to notice the difference. Ultimately, withholding the instant yes is about shifting power back into your hands. It's about breaking free from the fear that love requires constant sacrifice. Love that requires you to erase yourself is not real love. It's dependence. By stepping into the strength of thoughtful choices, you not only disappoint the avoidant's expectations, you also redefine what love and respect should look like in your life. That's not just powerful, it's transformational. Do you want me to continue with keynote Fight Feist? Detach from their reactions in the same motivational 500-word breakdown. One of the hardest lessons in dealing with an avoidant is learning to detach from their reactions. When you care deeply, their withdrawal, their silence, or even their anger can feel like a direct reflection of your worth. You start to believe that if they pull away, it must mean you're not enough. That belief keeps you trapped in the cycle of chasing, explaining, and overcompensating. But the truth is, their reactions belong to them, not you. Detachment is not coldness, it's clarity. It's the realization that you cannot control how someone else shows up, and you don't have to let their emotional storms dictate your inner peace. Avoidants often retreat when disappointed. They might stop responding, shut down, or give you minimal effort, hoping you'll chase after them to restore the connection. This is their pattern. It's how they manage discomfort. But when you detach, you step out of that pattern. You stop interpreting their behavior as a cue for you to fix things, and you let them sit with their own choices. That shift is powerful because it places responsibility back where it belongs. And then it's not your job to manage their discomfort, and it's not your duty to rescue them from the distance they create. Detaching doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying. It's the difference between saying, "I love you, but your silence won't control me," versus "I need to chase you so I can feel secure." When you detach, you stop overreacting to every high and low. You don't get pulled into their withdrawal, and you don't scramble to make things right every time they sulk. Instead, you maintain your center. You keep showing up for your life, your goals. At first, this will feel foreign. If you've always tied your self-worth to how someone else treats you, detachment will feel like abandonment. But over time, you realize it's freedom. It's the freedom to breathe when they're distant, to keep your smile when they're moody, and to live your life regardless of their emotional state. That's how you begin to build emotional independence. You learn that their coldness doesn't define you, and their silence doesn't diminish your value. The magic of detachment is that it shifts the dynamic. When you stop reacting to their every move, they start to notice. The avoidant expects you to chase. When you don't, it unsettles the pattern. Some may step up because your calm strength forces them to reevaluate their behavior. Others may not. But either way, you gain clarity. You no longer live in a constant state of anxiety, waiting for their reaction to dictate your mood. You reclaim control over your emotions, your choices, and your life. Detachment is not about building walls. It's about holding boundaries without hostility. It's about saying, I refuse to lose myself, trying to hold on to you. That statement isn't angry. It's empowering. And in that empowerment, you realize that you don't have to fear their reactions anymore. Their silence is theirs. Their withdrawal is theirs. Their choices are theirs. And your peace, your joy, your worth, they belong to you. When you fully embrace that, you discover the strength to stand tall no matter how the avoidant responds. Do you want me to also write their keynote A6 stand in self-respect in the same 500-word motivational style so the set is complete? Standing in self-respect is the foundation of breaking free from the cycle of chasing, pleasing, and overextending yourself for someone who struggles to meet you halfway. When you're connected to an avoidant, it's easy to slip into the trap of making their comfort more important than your dignity. You bend, you adjust, you silence your needs just to keep the peace. But self-respect is the moment you decide that your value is not negotiable. It's the choice to prioritize your own emotional well-being over the approval of someone who cannot or will not give you the consistency you crave. And when you stand in self-respect, everything changes. Your energy, your confidence, and the way others respond to you. Self-respect means you stop explaining your worth to people who refuse to see it. You stop begging for attentions that should flow naturally, and you stop settling for half-effort love. With an avoidant, this is especially powerful, because their push-pull dynamic thrives on the idea that you'll tolerate less than you deserve. Every time you accept crumbs, you reinforce their belief that you'll stay no matter what. But when you shift into self-respect, you raise the bar. You're no longer waiting for them to validate you. You're validating yourself. That's a disappointment to the avoidant because it removes their control, but it's also the very thing that frees you. Standing in self-respect doesn't mean you reject them harshly or act superior. It means you choose balance. If they withdraw, you don't collapse. If they avoid intimacy, you don't lower your needs to match. Instead, you calmly hold your standard. This is what I deserve, and if you can't meet it, I will not shrink myself to fit your limitations. That statement doesn't have to be spoken. It shows up in your actions, your boundaries, and your energy. It's in the way you walk away from games, the way you stop begging for clarity, and the way you invest in yourself instead of waiting for them to change. The truth is, self-respect attracts more respect. When you honor your own value, people can feel it. Some avoidants may rise to meet that energy because they sense they can no longer take you for granted. Others may fall away, but that's a gift, not a loss, because it clears the space for someone who can truly see you. The most important shift happens within you. You stop doubting if you're enough and start living like you know you are. This path is not always easy. It requires unlearning years of people-pleasing, sitting in discomfort, and letting go of the fear of being alone. But the reward is priceless. When you stand in self-respect, you don't chase love, you invite it. You don't cling to someone who undervalues you. You release them with grace. And you no longer feel small in your own life because you've chosen to stand tall in your worth. That's the ultimate act of power. And it's the moment you stop just surviving relationships and start thriving within yourself. Would you like me to now weave all 6 keynote explanations into a single flowing motivational speech? So it sounds like a complete talk you could deliver.